Hi there folks, how you doing? So, this is an overview of the next character that I want to play, and it's going to be a boss-focused character. This is Blade Flurry, General's Cry Champion. I'm not going to have any gameplay for you, sadly, as I haven't actually made this build yet, but I did want to go over my plan for it and show you some of the gear that I've crafted for it, and give you guys an idea of what it is I want to accomplish with this build. So, the basic idea with this character is I wanted to make a build that in boss fights, I could focus on dodging and nothing else as much as possible. And I think I've accomplished that with the core concept of this build. It's Blade Flurry General's Cry, like I mentioned. So what I'm going to do is I have instant war cries, and I'm going to bind Blade Flurry, General's Cry to left mouse button. And then as I walk around, that's going to cause General's Cry clones to spawn, run towards the nearest enemy, and Blade Flurry on them, so long as there's corpses. And I use Corpse Walker. So I don't need to do any sort of setup like I've done in previous builds where I'm doing Cyclone, Cast Wall Channeling, and Desecrate to spawn my corpses. They just happen. So that eliminates a button I have to press. No cycloning, no nothing like that. Corpses just kind of happen wherever I go. But there's a caveat there. If I'm not cycloning, I need to get Fortify. It's a very powerful defensive layer. This is hardcore. I need to not die. So we go Champion and we pick up Fortitude. Now I just have Fortify all the time without having to do anything, without having to hit any enemies. So that's great. We've solved that problem. We have corpses. We have Fortify. We need to get Recovery into the build. I don't have access to Leech. I don't have access to Life Gain on hit since I'm not cycloning and I'm not hitting enemies or anything like that. So, as a result, since we're summoning corpses anyway, we go for Disciple of Kitava. That gives 5% of life recovered every second, and it's recovered, not regen. So a nice bonus here is that the laser in the Maven fight that turns off regen does not shut this off. And we also pick up Escalation on the tree, which is 10% of life recovered when you use a War Cry, and the War Cry has about a 1.8 second cooldown. So that is around another 5% of life recovered a second, on average. So it's about 10% of life recovered a second that way, and then I have things like Surging Vitality, which gives me 4% of life recovered over a second 10% every 4 seconds, got the numbers backwards, as well as just a decent amount of life regen. So we're passively recovering life, that's great. We're passively getting Fortify, we're passively summoning our dudes and getting our damage out. And as a result, there's nothing I gotta do except for just run around and dodge. That is it. That is my entire responsibility in a boss fight. Use movement skills to avoid abilities from enemies and run around and don't get hit. Because the last thing that we're doing is I'm stacking a whole bunch of mana regen. If you look at some of the gear I've got here, we've got 63% mana regen there. I've got 68% mana regen on the helmet, which is a Warlord mod. We're going to go for a mana regen boot enchant on the Corpse Walker, another mana regen roll on the ring. And the reason for that is I'm running Chainbreaker like I did on my Trapper, which gives increases and reductions to mana regen, apply to rage regen, and you have 3 rage generated a second. So I can get roughly 200 and something % mana regen into this build, which gives me about 9 rage generated a second passively, and I pick up the helmet enchant, which has Berserk, has 40% reduced rage loss per second. So I guess I do have 2 jobs in boss fights: dodge and press Berserk when it's off cooldown. That is it. That is all I do in boss fights. My damage is handled passively, my recovery is handled passively, my mitigation, aside from the Berserk, I guess, because I do have to press that button, is handled passively. In theory, it should be a really good bosser as a result of that. And the damage looks pretty good on paper. I don't know how accurate these numbers are to a single Blade Flurry. I believe that the less multi that General's Cry applies is not being applied here, but also exerted damage isn't being applied here, and their behavior is channel and then release at 6 stages, which I think is accurate to the damage here, but it's iffy. So this is about, let's say, 1 million damage per clone, and we have 5 clones. Assuming that exerted damage isn't being applied, but also the less multi isn't being applied. So let's chop off like 20% or something, just to account for that and be pessimistic and assume the worst here. We're looking at about 1 million damage per clone, and this is with kind of suboptimal damage gear. I don't have my Curse on Hit ring in here yet. I actually have the wrong Curse on Hit, because, as I mentioned, I've been crafting some of this gear, and that is the gear in the Path of Building is just the imported gear that I've crafted with a couple of things that I threw in to test. So I have this helmet, I have the chest piece that's in that Path of Building, I have the rings that are in that Path of Building, I have almost everything ready. Just need to finish 1 or 2 more pieces of gear, the most annoying of which being the rings. This one refuses to roll vulnerability on hit. It really wants to be a flammability ring. With Harvest, you can do caster to caster rerolls, and that will reroll between either flammability, vulnerability, or cast speed. Those are the only mods it can hit, and it has hit flammability 4 times. It really wants to be a flammability ring, and I really don't want it to be. And this one I'm trying to get Assassin's Mark on. This one is harder. You can get cast speed, Assassin's Mark, reduced effective curses on you, spell damage, I believe, maybe life gain for each enemy hit by your spells. There's a lot of caster mods on Shaper rings, so I kind of expect this one to take a lot more effort. I was hoping this one wouldn't. It's not cooperating with me at all. That said, they'll both be curse on hit rings eventually once Harvest gives me enough rerolls. We've got a base crit chest with additional curse, so I can use both curse on hit rings. We've got mana regen out the wazoo, like I pointed out. I still don't have the boot enchant, but that's just a matter of sucking it up and running enough lab. I've got a well-rolled Paradoxica. You want attack speed, quality, and fizz damage of some sort, which is exactly what we have here. I've got the helmet pretty much done. Obviously not the ideal life roll, but still roughly 80 to 90 life with crit multi, with fizz taken as fire, with fortify effect, and with mana regen to feed the berserk, as well as the berserk enchant. You could go for the General's Cry, summon an additional clone enchant. I actually wanted that, but I had a live search up for both, and over the course of a few days, this is the only helmet that popped up that worked for my purposes, so we went with this. The belt I rolled with an Essence of Sorrow to get a good dex roll. You need a lot of dex to wield a Paradoxica, and this dex roll here, combined with getting a fluid motion on the tree, will provide that dex. The fluid motion is something like 80 total dex, which is really significant. This is another 40 or 50, and then the amulet implicit gives a bit as well, which, speaking of the amulet, I fractured fortify effect. It's an Essence of Horror mod. Just roll that on amulets and fracture it using Harvest until you get lucky and win the 1 and 3 and fracture it in place. And then I rolled Contempt Essences for T1 fizz damage until I got a T1 or T2 life roll. The rest of this amulet isn't perfect, but it's good enough. We're looking for a bit better spiked gloves than this. I don't actually need the accuracy. Initially, I had planned to go for Master of Metal, but since the nerf, it's actually not really that much better than Worthy Foe. The damage is very similar, and going for Worthy Foe means I don't need to care about accuracy, which lets me drop Precision in favor of Vitality, so a little more regen into the build there, as well as fitting in more res rolls instead of an accuracy roll or two, which makes it easier to cap res, which can be a little bit of a problem with a build that has so many suffixes that it needs. You know, I need curse on hit on my rings, I need mana regen on my rings, I need, you know, crit multi, and I need mana regen, I need fortify effect on the helmet. There's a lot of suffixes that are being consumed by powerful mods here, so finding the res can be a little tough. Doable, but tough. And then for cluster jewels, we've got Mob Mentality and Provocateur, which gives charge gen and some crit scaling. And we've got Haunting Shout and Lead by Example, which gives Intimidate and Onslaught. Warcry jewels are just nutty with some of the nodes that they have. You know, in 2 jewels alone, I get every kind of charge gen, I get Intimidate, and I get Onslaught. And the reason every kind of charge gen actually works is because of Red Blade Banner's Infinite Power effect, which means that the node here that gives a 5% chance to grant an Endurance Frenzy or Power Charge per power just always grants at least 1 charge. Well, I think it's just 1. I think it just gives a random charge every time I Warcry, basically. So you can assume some charge uptime. Not literally 100%, but some, which is why I've gone to the configuration and put in 1 power and 1 frenzy on average, because I'll usually have at least that, oftentimes more. But yeah, there's a lot more detail and nuance to the build than just that, but I don't want this video to go on too long. If the build is a success, I will go into it much more in depth. This path building will be in the description below, but keep in mind things may change with this character. I haven't even leveled it yet. I'm still very much in the process of figuring it out. But the concept seems sound, and it looks like a fun build, so I've invested some currency into the crafting, and hopefully it turns out well. If it does, like I said, I'll make more content on it, and possibly even a guide, but it's an expensive character to get started, so I don't know if guide content is correct for this. I'll certainly do a gear guide video like I did for the Slayer, but I don't think I'll do a full text guide. I don't want some new player stumbling into trying to make this character and not being able to because they can't afford a Paradoxica, or they can't get all of the affixes they need to make every little piece of the build function. It's not the most low budget friendly build, but it does seem neat. So I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching. You have a good night.